Greg Parsons, CEO of CAVU Securities. Tell us a little bit about CAVU, what you guys do, and what is something in that organization.
Sure. So CAVU, we are a small investment bank broker-dealer in New York. We cover Fortune 200 treasurers we are both veteran and minority owned and operated, and we are trying to live into the mandate of being a solutions provider for that institutional audience as they look to access Wall Street for financial services. And at least for me, right, CAVU really is the for-profit platform, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that drives our foundation, True North Marine. So my passion is finding ways to support veterans in transition. So CAVU is the day job. It's a small investment bank in the city. We account for about 25 billion of assets across kind of the Fortune 500. And the nighttime activity is really the True North Foundation, which is CAVU's philanthropic withdrawals.
I love when people say 25 billion is small business, but I hold down a small business owner. So the title of this series is, Stories of Grit and Determination. How do you define very old the first time you ever happened to you?
It's interesting. I was, as I think about grit, right, there's, the word can be applied at so many different levels. And I think back around my experiences, right, there's the very obvious, in the Marine Corps, right, you need grit to get through the day, very dramatic episodes, all the way down to, minute elements of day-to-day life. For me, grit is, there's always a job to do. There's always one more step to take. And at least for me growing up, the expectation was you got that job done, you took that one step, and you didn't complain, right? There was, again, it applies both big and small, but there's just an attitude or element of continual forward traction, an acknowledgement of, not everything is fun, not everything is easy, not everything is rewarding, but there's a responsibility to whatever your network is at the time to continue to take that next step forward and get the job done, whatever that job might be.
That makes sense. So you mentioned growing up, kind of how that looked, right? So coming from a very successful family, talk about your upbringing and the different ways you had to kind of, how that shaped who you are today as a leader.
We're here all day on that one. It's not supposed to be a therapy session, but, and again, I couldn't articulate any of this as a kid, but, you get a little bit older in life and you start thinking back, and now I have two kids. I have an 18-year-old and a 14-year-old, and it's certainly, from a perspective, those were the catalytic moments that made me think about my own upbringing. But I grew up in the definition of a diverse household. My dad was 6'5", African-American, grew up in Queens. My mom was 4'9", grew up on a farm in Oklahoma. I was the firstborn. My middle sister was born legally blind and legally deaf. We adopted my brother, who was Native American, right? So this concept of diversity, right, was something that just was kind of a given, right? Kind of all walks of life, all thought processes. My dad was a Republican, my mom was a Democrat. Like, I joined the Marine Corps, my mom was a pacifist. I mean, kind of every dimension, there certainly was a foundational bedrock of the quality of, or the importance of, diversity of thought, diversity of people, diversity of background, diversity of skills, which is certainly a lens that for me is kind of driven through my entire career. And I think the second was independently, both of my, again, I couldn't articulate this at the time, both my parents, the value of education or the expectation of kind of doing your best and performing without excuses. Again, my mom grew up on a farm in Oklahoma, right? Like, you got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, you tended the livestock, because if you didn't, the livestock died, and you didn't eat. And my dad grew up in a household where, his dad worked 3 jobs to support the family, right? So there's just an expectation, not so much about getting A's or being the best, but there's an expectation that you delivered on whatever your mandate was at whatever point of life you were at, coupled with a strong sense of service, right? It didn't really matter if it was military service, political service, civil service. There certainly was an expectation, leadership through example, of finding always ways to give back. So as I think back to my childhood or formative years, right, kind of the importance of diversity, right, this element of, no one had time for excuses, and the importance of finding ways to plug in and give back, or certainly with it's called foundational bedrock, by which I didn't sprung from. And again, I couldn't tell you that when I was 15. I was like, why my parents always beat me up around X, Y, or Z, or, why am I getting crushed for not delivering? But that was kind of the unspoken expectation.
Gotcha. So that sense of service and et cetera, I imagine is what would cause you to join the Marines. And I know many people wear creds and they say, I'm most Marines to some leave here. So how did that come about?
Yeah. So yeah, look, I was lucky in that I certainly, from a family perspective, had this sense of service. My dad had spent a few years in the Army. And again, my mom was, while she had no kids in the military, right, there was always an expectation she gave. I grew up in a town where, without anyone coordinating it, was a little bit, mom, apple pie, baseball, military service was, it was a viable option. Even if you went to college, I think back in I grew up in a small suburb, high school class, maybe 150, right? So not a large town. 6 of us ended up joining the military it wasn't like Band of Brothers. We're all joining. It's just, so there's something in that town that's certainly helped foster a sense of duty. This is also, I graduated high school in 90 and I was in college in 91, right, when the first Iraq War, Gulf War popped off. But I'd love to say I was driven purely by sense of service, but also, growing up, play football, wrestle, rugby, right, very aggressive teenage kid. And I bought into the Marine Corps ethos, flip, line, and sinker of, oh, you think you're tough enough? Cool. Okay, that's a challenge, right? If you're going to challenge me, like, how could I not? And so once I joined, the Marine Corps has an officer program. It's almost try and buy. You go in the summers, right? Then you graduate, you have the option to take a commission. My first summer, frankly, I went down not having any clue what I was really, I saw the posters, I saw the, pop culture, what Marines were, but it was that first kind of series of training where I kind of hook, line, and sinker bought into for me, it's the ultimate team, right? There's a very clear sense of purpose. There's a very clear sense of sacrifice. There's a very clear sense of where you belong. And again, couldn't articulate that then, but now certainly as I think about where I've been successful, where I haven't been successful, that type of environment, I feed off of it, right? So, and certainly has defined or framed everything I've done ever since.
So to this point, it sounds like you've been pretty successful, right? You graduated, the school, Marines, etc. Then go to the transition. So kind of what was your transition like leaving the military? And did it go as planned or were there some bumps in the road?
Yeah, I mean, so I went from, I went to a prep school, Exeter in the Northeast, right? The right school. I ended up getting Princeton, right? The right school. I had and I say this with the caveat of, we weren't at war when I was in the Marine Corps. So I'm always, when I talk to combat vets, I'm always very conscious of talking about my service, right? Because, right, well, I serve, but you really serve. Had a quote unquote distinguished career relative to the time period, right? So when I got out of the Marine Corps in 98, I was on top of the quote unquote world, right? I had the right schools, the right backdrop, had the right Marine Corps experience, and I had no problem finding a job. I was sitting in Kuwait August 1st of 1998. I got home September 1st, and I had a job on Wall Street by like September 10th. Like, no issues. And I was married, had the right job, right? I was working on Wall Street, which was, the dream. And 2 years later, I had my epiphany where I woke up one night, was on the verge of, some would say I might have had a drinking problem at that point in my life, but I was couch surfing because I didn't have an apartment, looked in the mirror and realized that kind of death by 1,000 cuts. Somehow in that 2-year transition period, I had lost my job, gotten divorced, had no money, living on a friend's couch, right? It was supposed to be a week, then it was a month, then it was 2 months, then it was 6 months, right? So literally kind of bottomed out without any kind of catalytic event. Oh, this happened, and then my life fell apart. It was kind of death by 1,000 cuts where I went from kind of top of the world to bottom of the heap. Hence now, like, one of my passions is, and again, at the time, couldn't articulate why or what happened, just knew that fundamentally there's something that was structurally not in balance, and as a result, my life was falling apart. I now kind of try and dedicate a lot of time talking to veterans in transition, and I think there's a lot of parallels to veterans in transition and students in transition around, life lessons, or as I talk to folks and think about my own struggles, what do you pull out of it to help other people kind of skip that process? But the immediate transition was, on the surface, very smooth. The reality was it was quite a challenging experience. will kind of look up and be like, well, that certainly didn't work.
You said it's death by 1,000 cuts, and in the conversation we were having earlier, you talked about a lot of it was you just kind of not owning some of those things, right? Can you talk a little bit about how you, well, the first thing that worked out is how their fault, not mine, or et cetera. Like, how did you kind of get to that?
Yeah, certainly there was, look, I was a successful Marine, right? So there was no shortage of self-confidence when I got out. And I went to work on Wall Street, and I think, again, couldn't articulate this then, but there was a fundamental disconnect with the role, the job, and me as a person, right? I absolutely hated Wall Street. I found it. I went from what I thought was the most selfless environment to the most selfish environment, and it just didn't compute. I remember like it was yesterday, my first, I started in September, December's bonus season, and I'm sitting here with what I thought was a teammate, and he literally is scooping my work so he could go to the boss, talk about how he deserved the bonus and I didn't. I was like, what? Right? And so culturally didn't fit, and I had a lot of internal agita I couldn't articulate it. So when I left Wall Street, this is 99, internet's booming, right? So there's a very easy, well, all right, this didn't work. Let me go jump on the next hot thing. But when I left, it wasn't me. It was like, oh, banking's not for me, and this was a poorly rough battle. And then jumped to an internet startup. Had more cultural success, but for those who remember, March of 2000, the bubble burst, and well, there went that job. But again, it wasn't me. It was, well, the NASDAQ burst and the internet blew up. I didn't do anything wrong. But now I'm broke, don't have a job, and I start recognizing that, well, maybe it's not all of the external factors that are conspiring against me. It's more I have not positioned myself in the right spot to be what I call in alignment, right, where my energies are being deployed into an initiative or energy or a job that's giving me traction. That I kind of was spinning without knowing it. It was always someone else's fault or something. The world market crashing was the reason I wasn't moving forward enough.
Gotcha. So how'd you pick yourself back up? How did you get that sense of purpose in it?
Look, I got lucky. I obviously had that look, right, where, when you are rock bottom and you think everything's fine, you look good. But I was living on, I played rugby, coached rugby, and I was living with rugby players when I was kind of bottoming out. And you've had that look where a friend, one of the women I was living with, who I had coached in college, she probably asked me 40 times, hey, you should come out to practice. You should come out to practice. You should do something positive. Get off the couch. And it'd been no. And then that's one night when I kind of looked in the mirror and I was like, my life is falling apart. For whatever reason, that day I said yes. And I'd love to say it's a deliberate, this will get me back in the game. But it was more, crap, I don't know what else to do. And light bulb went off, right? All of a sudden, I found myself back, the first practice, I was back in an environment where everyone, quote unquote, spoke my language. There was a team that had a common sense of purpose. Rugby happens to be one of the most accepting sports, right? All body types, all walks of life, right? Come one, come all, come play, right? So it was the right environment. And like a fish to water, like that became my purpose. I was the coach. And for the next 8 months, like that's what got me out of bed in the morning, right? And it was almost overnight. Like took me a while to find a job, took a lot of my life back together, but almost overnight I went from being this guy sleeping on the couch, kind of circling in life to, hey, I know what 3 o'clock there's practice, and all night I'm doing practice plans, and I found my tribe, and I went from being fairly depressed and isolated to kind of in the mix. And then like everything, once you start making positive, if you got negative traction in life, you don't do anything to fix it, it will continue. You start getting positive traction in life, then you think about what's giving you that traction. I'm a big believer in it. It'll accelerate. And so for me, it was finding that purpose, finding that community, which then gave me the kind of the foundation to get the job. Happened to be a job that's much more aligned with who I am as a person. Right, success at that job, right? But that was the pivot point with the U-turn relative to getting back on track.
Yes, you talked about a couple of pivots personally, obviously, but then professionally. So as you're picking yourself up, etc., you then get your next opportunity. Talk a little bit about that next opportunity.
Yeah, so I am now 30, right? I graduated college, Marine Corps experience, and again, this is in the 90s where there certainly wasn't the groundswell of what's called veteran transition support that exists today, but for even understanding of the military community, small investment bank that I didn't like and no one had heard of, and a fickle antitrust. And so, non sequitur, I'm a huge proponent of the power network. Talk about that later. But I leaned on a Marine colleague who got me an introduction, that got me the interview at McKinsey and Company, right? A large, white shoe, best in class management consulting firm. And I went through the process of interviewing there, and I had my first kind of proactively, it's being humbled moment where I'm 30. For those, consulting firms hire in waves, right? It's very formally. Graduate college, you're hired as a first-year analyst, right? You graduate business school, law school, you're hired as an associate, right? It's kind of 10-year bands, right? You don't really move up or down those bands outside of the track. So I was a little bit non-traditional in that I'm showing up with a bunch of work experience. But I'm sitting there and I go through a bunch of case studies, and I get the job offer. And, my dad had given me some advice. And he was a fairly successful business person. He said, never take a first offer. So I get a phone call from the office man. Hey, we got great news. We'd love to give you a job offer as a first-year analyst at McKinsey. And I was like, first-year analyst? I'm 30. Like, I was a captain of the Marine Corps. I'm like, well, we should talk about salary. Maybe talk about some vacation perks. And he goes, Greg, I'm going to hang up the phone. I'll call you back in 2 minutes, and you're going to say, yes, I'd love to take a job. Or you're going to say, no, I politely decline. Click. And so that was I really need a job. And this is probably the time to be humble and take the opportunity set, which ended up being one of the best decisions I ever made. So we called back. I said yes. And I started as a 30-year-old first-year analyst at McKinsey, which ended up being a blessing in disguise. Again, at the time, didn't know what he would do for me. But that was for me, kind of the pivot that kind of solidified the resumption of traction.
So basically, you're saying your dad gave you bad business advice.
Two pieces of business advice, neither could have worked. I'm sure there's merit in the premise that never take a first offer, but that exact moment, I mean, there's a little bit of it's on you to have some contextual understanding, which I didn't have. So,
just not when you're 30. Try to do it.
Yeah, that you just take one job, take your sons.
So you're a 30-year-old analyst at a McKinsey. Is that weird? Like, do you have imposter syndrome because you've kind of gone through the shroud? Do you feel like, my peers are 22, I can't connect with these folks? Or like, talk to me about like, what was that experience like?
A few different answers. I mean, certainly it was, I had to be very deliberate, decisive of eating my piece of humble pie, right? So I'm sitting in, McKinsey. It's what I loved about it was it's very formal in how it builds culture, right? There's a way to speak. There's a way to answer the phone. There's a way to communicate. And, oh, by the way, if you're a first-year analyst, guess what? You're sitting in all those classes, right? So I had to sit there as a 30-year-old, have someone tell me, here's how you answer the phone. And I had to keep my mouth shut because I was like, come on, really? And certainly from a tenure band perspective, I was the older brother to my peers in that, right? I was graduating about. However, I was smart enough to keep my mouth shut and take advantage of the opportunity where it was a platform to learn every professional skill needed to learn in what is almost a low pressure environment. In that, all right, I'm 30, right? McKinsey lived into its promise. Like, we're going to hire you as a first-year analyst. We're going to expect you the work of a first-year analyst. We're going to grade you as a first-year analyst. And at some level, there's, okay, I got 7-8 years on you, and this can't be that hard. And so if I show up and I work hard, keep my mouth shut, obviously I'm getting graded against 22-year-olds. So I was the guy topping. I was top of the class until I made project manager because my peer set was 10 years. But in all seriousness, there was an element of being very deliberate around, look, life never moves in a straight line. I never thought I'd be kind of a first-year analyst at 30, but that's where we are. So hard work and performance will always elevate, right? So keep your mouth shut, work, and eventually you will, quote unquote, go from behind if here's your career track, off to the left, right? At this point, I'm like, man, I've fallen under where I'm supposed to be. But the premise is at some point, right, the hard will pay off and I'll springboard above. And at least at McKinsey, it ended up working out. I mean, again, there's always the element of life's never going to be a straight path. So this is 2001. was probably the last person hired on the East Coast because while no one wanted to admit it, we were going into recession. And the first thing that Fortune 500 companies cut in recession is management consultants. And McKinsey doesn't fire people, right? They just kind of park you on the beach.
Yeah.
And at the end of the year, you're judged on utilization. Hey, okay, billable hours, you were at 90%, you were at 80%, you were at 100%, et cetera, et cetera. And so I show up, and I'm the 30-year-old first-year analyst, right? Well, the senior people didn't care. They're like, you're an analyst, and I can put you on my team, and I'm going to get 8 more years if I could put you on my team, or I could put this kid just out of college on my team. I'm going to take you 10 out of 10 times. And so in my first year, where most folks were running utilization of 20, 30, 40, maybe 50%, I ran at 140%. I didn't have a day off in 3 years because, from my side, I was like, you're going to give me opportunity. I got to crush this, right, to springboard forward. And from the firm's perspective, they were like, all right, you're somebody who is taking advantage today. We are getting additional value because, hey, we only have to pay him as first-year analyst. And he actually is performing much more like, his tenure band. So again, right, I couldn't control that it happened to be a recession and no one else was at work. But what I could control is every time someone said I've got a job, I'm like, yep, I'm your guy, and I got it done right beyond about above par. So it ended up being a fantastic, what I call step back to leap forward.
So ultimately, you decided to leave McKinsey. What kind of drove that? You found yourself get your mojo, right? And then what did you want to do next? Did you want to kind of go more corporate, or did you have the entrepreneur part?
No, for anyone thinking about consulting, right, it's a fantastic training ground, but I fell into the trap at consultants, right? All right, I'm done giving advice. At some level, for me, I want to own the outcome. So I hit the inflection point where I was a junior partner in the zone to make senior partner, or make true partner, and probably two key inputs in the decision. One is I'm a big believer in network and people and mentorship. McKinsey's my career was very much dictated by having the right network of senior people where here's the bond. I will deliver for you. So when I was an analyst and you were a project manager, I'm delivering for you. And you get promoted from project manager to junior principal, and I get promoted from associate to engagement manager. You're going to make sure I get promoted, and I'm going to keep delivering for you, right? So kind of that style of relationship, which is very focused on human connection and delivery and making your peers and your boss look. Your goal is to make them look good. If you make them look good, you don't need to worry about yourself, right? I got to the point where to the people that supported me on my way up, they would have needed to put real emotional and political capital into the mix for me to make partner. And I wasn't sure I wanted to stick around, so I didn't want to burn those. I didn't want to have them burn those relationships on me because the relationship was too important. And I had hit the point where I really just wanted to be an operator, right? As a consultant, there's only so much advice you can give. It's not taken when you're right. You're like, you all need to run to the left. Management look at you and, well, you might still run down the middle. You're like, no, left. Only so many times you can be like, all right, if I was in charge, here's what I'd do. So I ended up leaving because my timing is always impeccable. I left and started a financial asset manager in 07, 08, which for those that were...
Well, not just
that should put us...
But not just a financial manager, a mortgage-backed security financial manager. So what was the kind of last night? You were...
I'm the forebearer of doing any industry.
Yes. So I say he's doing just do the opposite. That's success. So let's talk about from 07 to now, right? So you've had a couple of cents. I want you to talk about the mortgage banking, but how did you pick absolutely one place to be and scale the kind of keyboard or some dog?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually think it's the perfect place to be. Hindsight 2020, but right. So right, I had my very McKinsey-esque 5-year plan. Right, I was going to go find a business, launch a business, build a business, sell the business, clap my hands, and walk off into the sunset. And then for those that were paying attention, the crisis really started in the money fund space. Right, so mortgages there were issues, and then our whole financial system almost collapsed, and money funds, which are supposed to be the most stable of instruments, broke the buck. And the firm I was, again, where there's challenges, opportunities. So the firm I was working at as the COO, we went from $3 billion of assets to $400 million of assets in a week. The founder was like, I'm out of here. This is too much for me. And I said, well, I'll take over. But to your question of kind of the arc, there was, frankly, for me, much more of a small business. How do you grow a small business challenge versus I have got an intrinsic desire to be a mortgage manager. I've got a belief and a thesis that, business is business is business. It's all about human connection. What I'll call the softer skills, like can you communicate? Can you lead? Can you manage? Can you problem solve? Content you can learn, right? So on day one, we had no mortgage assets. And when I wound the firm down, we had grown it to $5 billion of mortgage assets. So I'm the guy running around Wall Street in a very specific industry. I had never traded a mortgage bond in my life. I didn't know what a mortgage bond was at any level of detail, right? You can learn the content, right? But can you lead? Can you build? Can you manage? Can you inspire, et cetera? So for me, it has been and always is kind of a management leadership exercise, irrespective of what is the product, the actual product that you're bringing to market. So, and again, right, all good entrepreneurs, right? I have my 5-year plan. I'll do that. And this now I'm 2008. Hold on. So 2008, like 30. I'm in my mid 30s. I'll do this for 5 years, sell it, bounce. And, in 2008, we had started with like 150, 200 million of assets. And in 2013, we had 300 million of assets, which in our world doesn't pay the bills. All right, well, here's another 5-year plan, right? We had cycled through employees and we had gotten a position and we did all the right things on paper, and yet we hadn't grown, right? So I was like, time's ticking. All right, next 5-year plan. So 2013 to 2018, we actually had a lot of success, right? So we probably started 2013 with 300-400 million assets, and by 2018, we're a few billion. And we had the right people in the right spots, making traction, right? We were building a brand, right? Everything you would check on the traditional list of are you successful? All right, but we still weren't there, right? So now it's been 10 years. Had kids, gotten divorced, like life is kind of all over the map. Nothing happens in a straight line, but we've got business traction. And 2018, so by 2018, we were firing on all cylinders. And if you had met me February 2020, I was king of the world, right? Now, if we're at $5 billion, we're raising $100 million a month. I got the team at 30. I'm CEO, right? Because I got the right CIO. I have all the right pieces on the chessboard where I now get to play. Oh, I look at this, right? We got this. And then March of 2020, right? COVID happens. And I was the guy that on Monday had $4.5 billion of assets, $25 million top line, $15 million in expenses, so nice profitable business. And by Friday, we had $1.5 billion of assets, an $11 million top line, and $15 million cost, right? Overnight, because third week in March of 2020, the fixed income markets fell apart, right? So here we go, life another curveball. And ended up, that was so destructive, we ended up winding that company. We sold the company, merged in a larger platform. But by any metric, right, as an entrepreneur, right, while I take a lot of pride out of what we built, it was a miss, right? Like, I spent 2008 to 2020, so 12 years of my life kind of evaporated overnight. So then, okay, what's the next 5-year plan? So we pivoted, launched an investment bank, and this is 2021, 22. So we're 3 years into the 5-year plan. We're not going to hit the target. We will not be done in 2 years, but there's an element of, enjoy the process. And what I always say, right? Don't focus on the end state, focus on the process and the journey.
Well, so yeah, as a pervasive thing, right? Like how do you keep going? So that's a lot, 12 years.
Sir, I mean, very early on, I was fortunate. I kind of internalized that nothing in life moves in a straight line. There are people that have the plan and people that don't have the plan. There's people that know what they want to do next and people that don't know what they want to do next. Guess what? Fast forward 10 years. If you thought you knew exactly how it would map out, you don't. And if you don't know how it's going to map out, that's cool because in 10 years, you'll have built a journey, right? So certainly from a mindset perspective, I am very comfortable with circuitous, non-linear paths. Some as a function of that's kind of the hand I've been dealt, and it's also something I'm comfortable with. There's also an element of grit, right? There's a job to do. You got to get it done and not complain, right? Whether it's we're privately owned, right? So for years there was a series of investors where, if you look up, you have investors that you have an obligation to, and if you look down, you have employees you have an obligation to, right? So hey, Greg, guess what? You don't have time to complain because you got people paid both up and down, right? So there's an element of, even amidst the chaos, there's the ability to focus up, left, right, or down, and not focus on yourself. Which, relative to how do you take the next step? How do you take the next 10 steps? Right, kind of has been a constant drumbeat. I mean, one thing we have never, since 2007, I've never missed payroll. Now, the company ended up not working. We ended up having to wind it down. We have a new company, but there are ways to tease out success, I believe, kind of to any environment, no matter what's kind of swirling around you. And then at some level, I was forced to internalize. You can't take it personally. Like, if you show up and you master the content and you put best foot forward and you deliver on your side of the equation, right? You live into this idea of grit. Certainly in business, right? Things are going to work. Things are not going to work. It's not, if you delivered on what you could deliver on, right? Some things are out of your control. And so I had to struggle with this, but you are not the business, right? The business is the business. You are you. Employ your skill set, act the way you treat people the way you want to treat them, lead the way you want to lead them. The fact that the path isn't straightforward is not necessarily a reflection on you as a person.
So I love how you said that you're not the business, right? So obviously this is student-led and focused. What are some of the takeaways that you would say for students who are thinking about, some have a plan, right? Because I'm going to graduate, go to McKinsey, not tell them you want to negotiate the offer, right? Some are going, I have no idea what I would do when that comes. What would you tell them they should be thinking about and how they should be planning for what the first stages of career look like?
Look, I think it's as much life advice as business advice. And again, I think there's a lot of similarities between a lot of talk I do to veterans and students. Step one, you got to define your purpose, right? If you're a veteran, right, it was given to you, you joined, you served, and you never woke up wondering, what am I doing here today, right? And then you get out to the civilian world, and nobody cares, right? As a student, right, at least when I think back when I was a student, right, there was a sense of community and sense of purpose. You had your tribe because your identity was wrapped up in being a college student, right? Then you get out, and guess what? Nobody cares. And you're coming from an environment where your purpose is kind of embedded to an environment where you need to create it. And if you don't spend time being deliberate about what gives you juice, you fundamentally going to be a disconnect, and it's going to be a challenging path, right? It doesn't matter what your path is. If you're not in sync with your purpose, and your purpose can evolve over time, right? Different stages of life, you have different purposes. But if you don't take the time to build it, right, because you're a college student kind of that's embedded, right, you're setting yourself up, my belief, you're setting yourself up for failure, or you're setting yourself for a more challenging path. The first is like, take the time to define your purpose, what gives you juice, and then build off of there, as opposed to the reverse, which is, I was told the right path is go be an investment banker, so I'm going to go find a right investment banking job, then I'll figure out how to make it work, right? You can get on a treadmill, it's not going to work. So find your purpose is probably two, right? Really focus on, for me, it's focusing on what I call owning your job. Right, it's kind of a mindset of both as an employer, and I think back to where I've had success. It's whatever, be the person that whatever you choose to do, those around you, below you, next to you, and above you, you're the person they can count on to get it done. And that sounds ridiculously trite, but it is it's amazing how that simple premise doesn't exist at the level that you would assume it exists, right? As a small business employer, it's baffling to me, right? Especially someone who's all about culture, being like, what do you mean it's not done, right? Like, big report, small report, conversation. I mean, so there's an element of, look, you need to technically master whatever you decide to do next, own the content, master the content, build the skill set. but there's almost more of an attitude, which for me is the defining factors. Are you the person that your team, your organization, your community, your school looks at and says, oh, if I need to get something done, David's the guy, or not? And that in and of itself is such a differentiator in today's world, which, again, intuitively I don't really understand, but the fact is it is a differentiator. That if you've defined your purpose and you're mapping out a course, and no matter where you end up at any given time, you commit to being the person that everyone around knows that you're the person that gets it done, whatever it is. Like, there's no way you're not successful. And look, you can learn just as much from crappy experiences as positive experiences, right? Everyone's looking for the perfect first job or the perfect next step. Okay, maybe 10% of you hit it. The other 90% of you be like, you know what? Banking isn't what I thought, or being an architect isn't what I thought, or doing nonprofit work's not what I thought. You can grab just as much of those experiences, right? So as opposed to kind of putting your head down and saying, this sucks, what's next, right? Watch the managers that do really well. Watch the managers that you don't like, and say, you learn just as much from watching someone give a crappy lecture or a terrible presentation or a spreadsheet with errors as you do from watching someone who's doing it right? And pick just move. Always be deliberate about building your skill set and thinking about the tools that you're taking away from the experience, whatever next.
So how do you think about mentorship? So as a small business owner, obviously, I think you're very close to your team, et cetera. How are you kind of coaching people on a daily basis to, have that buy-in and, having that culture of that accountability?
Well, I mean, look, I'm a big culture person, and I think of the organizations, I'm a huge proponent. Culture is how you go from good to great. So, and culture can be this kind of amorphous, large pop down. It can also be the culture in your immediate group or team, right? So I think it's not just the responsibility of quote unquote leadership to drive culture, but if you have a team of more than one, right, you can be what I call a culture warrior, right? You can be driving to what is the right way to do things, and expectation, etc. I think there are ways to formally train to it. But I'm also within culture. I'm a huge believer in the power of people and what I call mentorship or networking, whatever it might be. When I was junior, I knew my role was to quote unquote make my boss look good, not from some superficial, but all right, I need to deliver at the best of my ability so that when he walked in or she walked into whatever they were doing, they looked good, right? That was success, right? If your boss looks good, right, and then you get them on, you're doing your job, right? And then the expectation was your boss is looking backwards saying, hey, how I think about Greg's professional development, how I think about career opportunity, how I think about networking, etc. Right? So if you kind of take that, right, I think of selfless service, right, to the application of people, right? There are folks above you that are going to be critical in helping you accelerate your path, whatever your path is. Hey, how do you add value to them? And then the expectation should be, hey, right, I need to be deliberate in trying to draw them into helping me succeed. And tactically, is specific to mentorship. I mean, like you guys must have heard 1,000 times, build your network, go find your mentors. Yeah. Tactically, right, be deliberate and show up prepared, right? I probably get asked every day, hey, don't forget to talk to so-and-so. And the number of times you get on the phone, you're like, hey, cool, where David? Yeah, David told, let's chat. You're like, what do you want to chat about? And they're like, well, I don't know. I just wanted to hear about your experience. Okay, like, how is that helpful to you? And how's that helpful to me, right? So I think as you are proactively building network, looking for mentors or looking for support, right, be deliberate around, make it easy for someone to be helped, right? Do the work, know the ask, have enough context so that when you show up, you're kind of maximizing their time and maximizing your time. I mean, that sounds a little bit too forced, but so one, wherever you end up, your role should be how do I make my boss, my peers look good from quality of work perspective, and then you'll be that guy or that woman. And then relative to kind of larger network, kind of outside of the immediate day job, be deliberate in building it, fostering it, cultivating it, and attack it. But every job I've gotten has been a function of pivot. And all of the success I've had has been a function of very strong relationships up and down the platform, right? Like I succeed when my team delivers. Right now, I'm the guy walking into Fitch, and if a Fitch book is right, I can sell all day long. Yeah. Right? If you've done the work, you've given me the right material, right? If you haven't done the work, I'm walking in one hand tied behind my back, right? We're all going to fail. So, I mean, it goes both directions. I'm very appreciative of folks who have internalized their job has made me look good when I walk into a meeting. And my job is to give them professional experience, help them grow and navigate. And so it's a symbiotic relationship. But some ADHD, it doesn't just happen, right? It needs to be quick. If you're lucky, it happens, right? But more take your destiny in your hands and be deliberate about driving it, both up and down.
Yeah, that's interesting because it ties into what you said earlier about leadership, how you defined it, right? Most people ask the question, how leaders born, are they made, et cetera. You got an interesting kind of thought about that.
Yeah, look, I think certainly there are innate characteristics where some people gravitate, have more of it intuitively, but I think it's learned. It is a skill that can be developed and practiced and augmented, right? I mean, the Marine Corps is one of the best leadership, quote-unquote, schools in the world. But I think there are things you get. There's an attitude, there's an energy. I mean, at some level, I think leadership is the management of energy and getting people to move in a direction that you want them to move without any authority to make them do it, right? So there are tactical things you can work on. There's education, right? What's the best way to learn and get experience? Well, what get experience? Well, how do you get experience if you don't have the time? You go read about or talk to someone that did that. Oh, hey, David, you did this in asset management. You tried to navigate your team through this crisis. What worked, what didn't work, right? I now am a better leader because I got one perspective, right? Anyone ever wants to live through a financial crisis and lose a lot of assets and wonders what to say to investors? You should call it, right? Because I lived through that, and I can save you a month of pain. Be like, all right, get right to the cut to the chase. So there are things you can do to augment yourself as a leader that, again, it's a skill, it's a practice that you can work on, you can hone, you develop, or you can be deliberate about it. It's not just, oh, hey, you're a captain of the football team, you're a natural born leader. Sure, right? But you can also, if there's more than one person in the room, like someone has the opportunity to lead, right? That's not always stand up on the table, rah, on the, but, the leadership by example, if you're the one in your cohort who's always over delivering, right? Rising tide, right? Folks who make, oh man, every time David presents, spot on. Like I need to elevate my work to his level, right? Not because he told me to, but because he set an example, right? There's leadership of, hey, I know that I'm better at this than you. Hey, how about I mentor, lean in, and help you get up to my level of activity, right? There's leadership. I have this statement of, own the outcome, right? I run a small, 25 folks, right? There's an investment team, there's an operations team, there's a marketing team, there's a sales team, right? Very simple project. Let's get the investor statement out at the end of the month on the 5th business day. Like I'm enough of a Marine where I like 5th business day is 5th business day, not 6, not 4. And the number of times where, everyone has their role, right? The investment team has a day, the ops team has a day, the marketing team has a day, sales team has a day, right? They all have to work together to get it out on the film. And the number of times you go, hey, did it go out? They're like, no, we missed. And you're like, what do you mean we missed? And, month one as well, the operations team didn't get their stuff done in time. And then the marketing team didn't acknowledge, like, I don't understand the whole outcome. So, well, my job, I'm supposed to do it in 12 hours. Well, okay, but you got it 12 hours late. Someone needs to adjust on the fly so we can, we hit the objective, right? So there's leadership one-to-one. There's leadership relative to the experience of organization, right? So there's always opportunities to practice the skill, make the decisions, and what I think is lead, right? Beyond just, okay, you're top of the pinnacle and you're kind of setting a strategic vision. Like IEB leadership is much more tangible and pragmatic. You kind of get in the building.
I love that. Well, that's some really good advice. I think we can give you some softballs now, okay? Not just get us like a leadership quote. So, tell me someone who's inspired you along the journey and who is someone who still inspires you today.
I got something. Like I think in life, blessed, right? I mean, both my parents from different directions were inspiration, right? Kind of their ability to, it was a biracial couple back in the 60s before that was even remotely accepted, and the way they navigated the way they navigated balancing corporate success, raising a family, instilling values. So I think at a deep life level, I'm fortunate where probably my parents my biggest inspiration. From a work perspective, kind of every job I've had, there's been like key figures that I'm like, when I grow up, I want to be like you, right? Different dynamics, right? When I was in the Marine Corps, my first boss, Captain Logan, couldn't stand the man, but we were going to war. I was like, that's a Marine right there. That guy is the quintessential definition of professionalism. I need to be like him for the quid of my life. Get out, right? When I was at McKinsey, this boss that kind of dragged me up through the ranks, I was like, all right, within the context of consulting, right? You are the type of person I want to be. So for me, I've kind of drawn inspiration from people at different walks. And I think you different inspirations at different times in your life, different types of inspiration at different times in your life. But it's something that, like, I don't want to say I'm deliberate about finding someone to be inspired by, but I'm very open to every environment. One of the first things I do is scan the crowd and say, "Your money good. I want to be like you. Not so much. Oh, you're a high performer. I want to be like you. Not so much." Right? I mean, you can very quickly, if you're open to it, identify who's performing and who's not performing, and okay, how do I mold myself after those that are succeeding, whatever is binary you're in.
So we heard about you being a ruggy. Was that what was higher? Rug. What is another skill or talent that people will be surprised to know that you have?
Talent. I can actually work an Excel spreadsheet. I'm a Marine, right? So a lot of people are like, yeah, eat some crayons, but I can work an Excel spreadsheet pretty well. What about skill set? Pat, I love being outdoors. I mean, for someone that has spent the last 25 years in New York City, when I said people, last weekend I was whitewater rafting with my son, people were like, you get outside. Love being outdoors. In a past life, I had some talent playing the cello. But past life, if I had to pick it up now, you feel like, I thought you said you had talent.
We'll be interested to see you in the chat. Would be interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, and then last one. What are some words that free words that either your Marine buddies or your kids or someone would use to describe you?
First, when I say be loyal, again, I'm a big people person, and I think everything starts with kind of this premise. So you owe it to the people, in any setting, work, personal life, community, right? We're all here to serve. And so for me, that translates to loyalty, right? I'd like to believe that would probably be the first word. Okay, if you need something, call Greg. He's got your back. It's loyal. I think now certainly less when I was younger, but now family, like my kids are my everything, and I always try and navigate right professional success with ensuring that the focus always remains on family, which is a newer dynamic for me, and the last party driven. Or Brit/driven. I mean, again, I've had the opportunity to keep putting one foot in front of the other. It hasn't gone in a straight line necessarily, but you show up every day with the same amount of energy and excitement, and kind of the self-confidence that you put one step in front of the other. You don't know how far you can go until you decide to not take the next step, right? So you always take the next step, kind of literally, opportunities are endless.
Those are 3 great words, and thank you for the week and the credit there. Like to open it up, this is also my favorite part because you get to throw this box around. So,
yeah. So you talked about various areas throughout the years that you've been working. Which role that he played has been your favorite one in the?
Oh, at the. When I was, not to live in the past, when I was a platoon commander in the Marine Corps, that was the most fun, rewarding experience I ever had in my life, right? You're young enough to not really recognize the importance. You're 23, 24, 25. You're in complete control of your environment, and you're stuck in a leadership position, right, at a very early age. So that was, without a doubt, if I could recreate that feeling in the current environment, I would do it in a heartbeat. I mean, certainly I love, I very constantly moved away from corporate to run my own small business. So I love the flexibility and opportunity to shape culture. Like the job I have now, I wouldn't trade the world, but I love the opportunity to shape culture. I deliberately built a life around. Look, I think there's a misnomer, right? Everyone looks for the perfect job, right? I went to Wall Street, hated Wall Street, started off my story saying I left Wall Street. I was like, well, then aren't you back on Wall Street? Like, I'm very conscious and deliberate of, I love the intellectual stimulation of my job. I love the financial rewards of my job. It is emotionally battered, right? So I intentionally use our for-profit platform to drive my nonprofit activity. So for me, I said, all right, well, my job's giving me 2 out of 3 things. So how do I go create a life elsewhere? So I love being an entrepreneur, but without a doubt, like if you were like, go recreate a feeling, right? It would be my early days of Marine Corps, just from a leadership perspective, right? We're kind of being in complete control of your environment.
Heidi, I love you said. So I have a question because I have to have this reading early. So how did the operational discipline and listen for test leadership to be working the Marine have repaid the high stake risks and uncertainty of financial, particularly right now you are owning your company?
Look, I don't think this is necessary. I mean, the Marine Corps certainly augmented it, but it's not everything. I mean, I've said this at a bunch of new jobs. I'm like, look, nobody's shooting at us. We're sleeping inside of that. What's the problem? But there's an element of, especially as an entrepreneur, right? Like life is stressful, right? You've got big stresses, small stresses, and sometimes, the government just shut down, right? Like we got a multi-million-dollar contract we were supposed to close on Tuesday. We didn't get it closed because people didn't deliver on time. And I'm like, great. So now what's going to happen Wednesday? The government shuts down. I'm like, okay, so that means it might never close. Right, so there's always stress. So one is just, certainly the Marine Corps kind of solidified there's real stress, and then there's work stress. Right, so one is a mindset of, you need to deliver, you need to do your best, you need to sacrifice for your teammates, et cetera, but if you have your health, I mean, this isn't, I'm not sin. If you're healthy, and your family's healthy, and no one's shooting at you, you really don't have any problems. So like, certainly in the guise of work stress and work pressure, truly keep that in the back of your mind, right? Be like, all right, yeah, my engagement manager's yelling at me because I didn't do the model on time, or I got to stay up all night. Like, yeah, true, stressful is smallest, right? So for me, I've always kept that approach, and it's been helpful where, when the world's falling apart around you, you're like, well, what's the worst that could happen? Right? Like I kind of lived through it. I built a company, spent 12 years of my life. Like I was the company was me, and we failed. I woke up the next day and I'm like, all right, well, let's get back at it. So, I mean, again, I don't mean to be trite, but there's real stress in life. And then there's stresses we all put on ourselves. Oh, I got to find the job, or I got to get the model. I mean, you have to deliver, right? But I view that as positive stress as opposed to real stress. So for me, it was just a very frank early framing of how do you translate stress and make it positive, right? I need to get this done because the board presentation is on Friday, right? So there's an energy you get from that. There's an excitement you get from that. Yeah, it's stressful because you got to get it done. You have to get it done correctly. But for me, that's energizing because at the end of the day, I know that, well, A, I know I'm going to get it done. And then B, you're like, at the end of the day, I'm not, little she knows. And again, that's easy to say as a veteran, but the fact is we can all apply that mindset, right? Like if you're healthy and your family's healthy, right? At the end of the day, everything else is just noise. Sir.
Marver. You got to toss it. That's like the whole point of the thing. Like,
Hi. So you kind of talked earlier about how you really focus on culture and happening, and that's something that you value a lot. Do you have advice for us kind of starting to go into the workforce of finding a company that truly, embodies that culture that we want, or just puts it kind of at the forefront versus ones that just promote it but don't really live it?
Yeah, I mean, look, tactically, I think, certainly there's the reality of you're the one interviewing, right? So you've got to get the job. So, and the pendulum seems to be shifting. Maybe 3-4 years ago, it was a job. Employers were on the back foot, right? Because it was a war for talent. Maybe the pendulum's moving back. So, look, acknowledge that you're the one applying for the job. But I think there are questions in an interview, right? you should be looking at interviews as it's bilateral. Yeah, you got to prove yourself, but at the same time, you're kind of interviewing the company, right? So whether there's opportunities in a specific interview or use network, I mean, especially when you're talking about this earlier with technology, right? I only know the names, but there's a gazillion websites that give you the profile in every investment bank, right? For the eyes of analysts and associates, right? You want to know what it's like to work at Goldman Sachs, right? You can get peer reviews, Yelp reviews, like Glassdoors or something. But you can go out of your way, I think, to kind of dig on the culture of an organization, either in the formal interview process or around the edges, to get a sense of what you're walking into. And then take some ownership, right? Like, culture can be defined as, right, we started a company, you have a team of 3, right? The company might not have any culture, but there's no reason that the 3 of you can't build your own culture, right? How are you all working together? How are you supporting each other? What's important to you? What's important to you? What's important to you? And how do we kind of, the culture can be local, right? If you're fortunate, you work at a firm that really indexes on a culture, I think you can find that out through conversation. And if you're working at a firm that doesn't have much of a kind of stated top-down culture, build it, right? Start from the bottom. For me.
Love that. We have a chance for 1 or 2 more. Can you throw that all the way out there? Can we waft it up? I really do enjoy like throwing this around. That's out. Joe Walker.
How has your experience with leadership through the forces and through the workplace shape your confidence in?
Look, I'd like to think they stay consistent within the. I think the one forcible acknowledgement that I had to shift to with leading people is leading people. The difference in the services, you do have the formal mandate of when I say run left, you have to run left, right? So I'm leading, but I also have this backdrop of, at least for me, everyone was motivated. And if they weren't internally motivated, there were sergeants to make them externally motivated. All the Marines know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Like PFC didn't want to run to the left, the sergeant beat him up and he ran to the left, right? So there was a leadership principles on how to be a good leader, but at the end of the day, there was kind of the backdrop of, I can make you do this, right? In the civilian world or corporate world, right, you have all types of motivations, right? Not everyone is an A player, right? I have learned the hard way that I'm not very good at hiring. Like I now have 23 people work for me. Over the last 15 years, I probably had 75, 80 people work for me coming in and out. Half of them were the wrong hire, right? And they show up because some people, it's just a job, right? For me, it's all in team service, all one for all. Some people are like, look, I'm just here to get a paycheck. Like, I'm going to do whatever you tell me to do, the bare minimum, right? Other people, they've got life stresses, right? So how do you lead? Hopefully it's the same principles of, leadership in the front, selfless service, putting the interests of others in front of your own, including the organization, right? Same principles. I think tactically and tangibly, you have to find different ways to influence. First, you have to acknowledge that, okay, maybe not everyone's an A player, right? For me, that was one of the hardest things. I got Marine Corps to McKinsey. McKinsey, everyone's an A player, right? Everyone's there. We're all driven and you're not worried about, hey, project's due on Friday. I know we got 48 hours of work to do. We only got 36 hours to do it, but what are we going to do? Like my company now, as much as I'm like, all right, it's all about team, all about team, all about team, I got to be cognizant that there are some people that, if you're like, hey, I need you to work late tonight, they're kind of like, but I got banned for this. And you're like, what? Well, mostly, but neither here nor there. So I think hopefully the core principles, right? For me, it's how do you focus on, ultimately, if you focus on the success of others and you include the organization, you put that as the governing framework of any decision you make, by default, you'll end up leading well, right? Again, whether that's leading an individual team member or leading an organization, right? If your governing framework is how do I make you succeed or how do I make you successful or how do I put your needs in front of my own by default. Here in the right spot. Right, in the Marine Corps, right, officers eat last, right? It's a very simple statement, but it's a very powerful presence, right? We're going to make sure everyone else eats, and if there's not enough food, guess what? You're out. Like, I'm out, right? So if you take that mindset and you apply it to work, I think you're already starting in the right spot. But there is an acknowledgement that not everyone shows up to work. Like, it's fair for not everyone to show up to work as a quote-unquote A player, right? Everyone has different motivations, right? So
It's a great question. Great. Thank you for the sign. This is great.